You're sitting across from someone. Nothing dramatic, a table. A normal question. Can you just do this one thing? It isn't unreasonable. It isn't urgent. It isn't dangerous. You hesitate. Not because you disagree. Because something feels expensive. But you can't explain why. So you nod, small nod, harmless nod, and something invisible moves. You think you agreed to a request. You didn't. You adjusted your range of refusal. You are not weak. You are ordinary, which means predictable. You value stability. You want to be fair. You want to see yourself as cooperative, rational, kind. You don't like conflict that has no clear villain. You don't like tension without justification, so you give small permissions. A schedule shift, an extra responsibility, a conversation you didn't want, an opinion you soften. Nothing dramatic, nothing you can point to and say, that was the moment. Because there is rarely a moment. There is a pattern. The person across from you doesn't demand. They don't threaten. They don't force. They make requests that fit your identity, and identity is where leverage lives. It begins with something framed as temporary, just this once. You're the only one I trust. I know. This isn't your thing, but you feel chosen, trusted, reasonable. So you say yes, not to the action, to the story about yourself. You are helpful, flexible, understanding. The next request references the previous yes, not directly, subtly. You didn't mind last time. This is where the shift happens. The commitment and consistency principle does not feel like pressure. It feels like integrity. You don't want to contradict your past self, so you protect the pattern, even when the pattern wasn't yours. A single yes is a decision. Repeated yes becomes identity, and identity resists interruption. Nothing escalates sharply, that would trigger resistance. Instead, the baseline moves. A little more time, a little more access, a little less explanation. What once required discussion becomes assumed. You notice discomfort. But discomfort without evidence feels irrational, so you reinterpret it. I'm overthinking. It's not a big deal. This is normal. Gradual normalization doesn't erase boundaries. It changes what feels unreasonable to defend. You don't cross a line. The line moves around you, and because movement is slow, you experience it as continuity, not loss. You say yes to something you would have declined months ago. You notice that moment matters, but not for the reason you think. You expect alarm. You expect clarity. You expect a decisive correction. Instead, you feel tension. Cognitive dissonance. Your behavior and your self-image no longer match, but the mind prefers adjusting identity over confronting dynamics. It's cheaper. So the narrative. Updates. This isn't that bad. I'm just being mature. I've changed. When dissonance resolves, control deepens, because resistance requires a stable version of yourself to return to, and that version is now negotiable. Coercive control is rarely loud. It doesn't remove options. It rearranges consequences, saying, no becomes emotionally expensive, not catastrophic, just costly, disappointment, distance, subtle withdrawal, a shift in tone you can't prove. Nothing you can accuse, but enough to teach. You begin anticipating reactions before decisions. This is the mechanism, not obedience, prediction. You filter choices through someone else's comfort and call it consideration. Control succeeds when it feels self-generated, when the person believes, I chose this. Every interaction becomes a small trade. Peace in exchange for agreement. Clarity in exchange for flexibility. Connection in exchange for silence. No single trade feels significant, but accumulation creates direction. You start pre-approving requests that haven't been made. You explain yourself more, justify less resistance, shorten hesitation. The conversation changes, not the words, the default. Yes becomes neutral. No requires a reason. That is leverage. When refusal requires justification, choice is already restricted. At some point, you stop noticing requests, You notice expectations. You describe yourself differently now. Easygoing, low maintenance, supportive. These sound positive. They often are. But context matters. Are these traits? Or adaptations? Do they expand you? Or keep interactions smooth? Dark persuasion does not aim for obedience. It aims for self-editing. You remove friction before anyone asks and call it growth. Admitting influence is destabilizing. It suggests your choices weren't entirely yours. Your boundaries weren't fixed. Your identity was responsive to pressure you couldn't see. The mind resists that conclusion, so it protects continuity. You reinterpret the past to preserve agency. I wanted this. It made sense. I would have done it anyway. Sometimes. That's true, but certainty is the important part. Certainty closes investigation, and investigation interrupts leverage. The most stable control is the one that becomes your story. It isn't compliance, it isn't submission, it isn't dramatic transformation. The real product is narrower than that. Reduced range. Fewer versions of you feel available. Certain reactions feel impossible. Certain boundaries feel excessive. Certain exits feel unrealistic. Nothing is forbidden, but not everything feels reachable. This is loss of choice without visible restriction. You still decide, but inside a smaller room. And because the walls moved, slowly, you call the room normal. Think about the last time you said yes while feeling unclear, not pressured. Unclear. What did you protect? Peace, image, continuity. Did the decision solve a problem or prevent tension? How many preferences have been reclassified as flexibility? How many hesitations reframed as maturity? How many boundaries postponed until they felt unreasonable? When did refusal start requiring confidence you no longer had? The conversation that changed things didn't look important. No turning point, no confrontation, no realization scene. Just repetition, requests referencing past agreement, identity adapting to avoid contradiction. Discomfort normalized through familiarity. You didn't stop saying no. You stopped expecting no to be understood, and expectation shapes behavior more than permission ever could. The most powerful persuasion removes the need to persuade. Influence rarely announces itself. It accumulates in reasonable moments, polite exchanges, small concessions that protect coherence. You remain intelligent, aware, capable, which is why it works. Because the mechanism does not oppose who you are. It collaborates with it. Your need to be consistent, your tolerance for ambiguity, your preference for stability over friction. Nothing was taken suddenly. Something was adjusted repeatedly. One day, you notice a question forming before decisions. Is it worth the discomfort of refusing? That question feels practical, mature, measured, but it contains a quiet assumption that refusal is disruption, and agreement is normal, and when agreement becomes the default, control no longer needs a voice. The conversation where you slowly stopped saying no didn't end. It became your internal dialogue. And the most unsettling possibility is not that someone changed you. It's that the change felt reasonable every step of the way.